Good evening to those of you who are signing in. I'm going to give it about 30 seconds to a minute for everybody to sign on and join us before we get started, but welcome. Okay, so let's get going. Welcome to everybody. If you are joining us tonight for financial aid and scholarships, you will not be disappointed. You're going to definitely find that we're going to give you a wealth of information on, how to get to college, how to pay for it. So a couple things before I really launch into this. First of all, this is being recorded. So although you may want to take some notes, we will be sending out the recording to all attendees and everybody who signed up after the fact. So you don't need to be madly writing down everything that we say today. This is also not a super formal webinar. So I want to encourage you to ask your questions as we go. And if we are able to answer them in the middle, then we absolutely will. In order to ask a question, if you're not familiar with this platform, you simply roll your mouse over the bottom of the screen. You'll see there's a Q&A box. You can click in there and pop your question in there. You should also see a chat box, and I will be including a couple of links later on, so keep your eye out for those. Also, through Eventbrite earlier today, you should have gotten an email that had a link for you to download 3 handouts, unusual scholarships, some financial aid terminology, and also some sample questions that we find are really useful when you're talking to financial aid offices. So if you want to make sure you have those ready, we will be referring to them throughout the presentation. So for anybody who is joining us tonight and who doesn't know us yet, we are Colledge. Colledge is a private admissions advisory group working closely with students and their families anywhere on their path to higher education. Our work is mainly aimed at identifying and applying to best fit colleges and universities, but it also tends to kind of uncover students' real passions along the way. One thing that's really unique about our approach is that we actually approach each student with a team. So this is designed to mirror the actual admissions process. I don't know if you know this, but behind the door, behind those closed admissions officers' doors, they actually meet and they discuss and they advocate and even argue about the applicants that they're seeing come through the door. So they're really bringing kind of a multiplicity of their perspectives, and that's what we like to bring to our kids as they prepare to set them up for success to the best of our abilities. And this is really a tried and true method. In fact, last year, 85% of our 2020 students were accepted to at least one of their top 3 choice schools, often more than just one. So we feel very proud of our graduating seniors, and we're really excited about this year's class. So I'm very excited to introduce Jeff Tang. He has worked in higher education for over 15 years. He's been with us for, I think, at least 3 or 4. His career began at the University of Southern California as a financial aid counselor. So he is kind of our group's financial aid guru. He obtained his master's in education at USC as well, and now works at USC's Marshall School of Business Undergraduate Advising and Student Affairs Office. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Kelsey. So just a little bit more about myself and the work that I've done with Colledge. As Kelsey said, I've been with Colledge for about 4 years now, and I really enjoy the work that I do working with these high school students. My day-to-day job at USC really, is working with students who are already in college, so it's very nice and exciting to work with students on the other side of the river. And just working with them, working through this whole process, and then ultimately at the end finding out the schools that they've gotten into and sharing in that excitement is just a joyous thing that I get out of working with Colledge. So for tonight, the purpose of this workshop is really to help you navigate through the financial aid process. Applying for financial aid and scholarships can be a very stressful process. And my hope for tonight is to really provide you with some tools that you'll need to better understand what financial aid officers are looking for. And mainly, financial aid offices, they're really looking for three things. They want as much information about your financials as possible to accurately determine what your financial aid eligibility is. They want honest, accurate information, as well as just they want all that information in a timely manner, and make sure that you follow up with deadlines and things like that. Before we jump into the presentation, we're going to put up a poll just to see what you are trying to get out of tonight's session. So if you don't mind just kind of checking through that poll, and we will move forward once the poll is done. All right, so the results are in. So it looks like the majority of you want to know about how to apply or if you'll qualify for a scholarship. So that's definitely something we'll talk about. We'll definitely talk about different types of scholarships and how to apply and qualify for those. A lot of you are looking about half of you are looking into how to apply for need-based aid and which schools are most generous and what the deadlines are. So it's kind of across the board, and we'll definitely touch upon all of these topics throughout the presentation. So thank you for participating in that poll. All right, so for this presentation, what we're going to go over first is we'll talk a little bit about financial aid terminology. You're going to get a lot of vocabulary terms thrown at you when you're going through this process. So I'm going to talk about what some of those terms mean, and then talk about the different types of financial aid out there and how to apply for those sources of aid. We'll talk a little bit about scholarships, how to apply, different sources, things like that, and then I'll provide some insider tips. Since I have experience working in a financial aid office, I can tell you about some of the things that go on within a financial aid office to help you out. And then I'll provide you with some resources to help you through the process as well. And then we'll end with some question and answers. All right, so financial aid terminology. So these are some of the most common terms that you're going to run across when you're applying through financial aid. And one of the handouts that was emailed to you earlier have all these terms and definitions and a bit more as well. So you can definitely use that as a guide as you're going through this process. The first thing I want to go over is need-based aid. So need-based aid really just means financial aid that's based on your need. So this is what financial aid office will award you based on what your income and assets and everything that you put into the financial aid application. That's called need-based aid. Merit-based aid is basically scholarships. It's financial aid that's based on a student's merits. So it's based on their admissions applications, their GPA, activities, test scores. That all goes into awarding merit-based aid. Federal methodology, FM, that basically means the process or the method that the federal government uses to calculate financial aid, and they have different calculations that they use based on your financial aid application, and that's called the federal methodology. That compared to the institutional methodology is what certain schools will use in addition to the federal methodology. Some schools will have their own way of calculating financial aid eligibility based on other criteria, and so that's known as institutional methodology. Cost of attendance, that is basically the price tag of how much it costs to attend college for that year. So the cost of attendance includes things like tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, travel costs, things like that. That all goes into a cost of attendance. Not everyone's going to have the exact same price tag, but it's a rough estimate that the schools use to determine financial aid eligibility. The next is expected family contribution. You'll often hear EFC thrown around, and basically expected family contribution is a number that is calculated based off of your financial aid application through the FAFSA application and what the school calculates through their institution methodology. It's basically what the school expects your family to contribute to the student's education over that year. And then finally, financial need is essentially the cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution, and that's what the financial need is. So that number of the financial need is what financial aid offices will use to award financial aid, and that's the amount that they're going to base that off of. And this is basically a sample of what a typical offer letter looks like. Every school is going to have a different version of an offer letter, so it'll look very different, but I just want to go over the components that you're going to see in an offer letter that you get from a school. All schools will have the cost of attendance, which again, it's basically the price tag that includes tuition fees, housing, all of that for the year, and that's how much they estimate the cost of attendance will be for that year. Some financial aid offices or schools will put eligibility factors, meaning what factors regarding your student, what did they take into account when calculating financial aid eligibility? So things like enrollment status, whether a student is full-time or part-time, affects how much financial aid they get. If they're living on campus or if they're living at home with family, number of people in the family, and number of other students who are in college. All of these things will affect financial aid eligibility, so oftentimes that'll be listed on financial aid letters. And then you get into the awards. So this offer letter has a sample of different awards that can be presented through a financial aid offer letter. Things like university grants, federal grants like SEOG and Pell Grant, state grants, work study, loans, those will all be presented in a financial aid offer letter. And then if there's any other scholarships a student is receiving outside of the university, those are typically listed among the offer letter as well. All right, so let's talk about the different types of aid, and we'll start with the need-based aid. So need-based aid, again, it's financial aid based on what the calculated financial need of the family is. So the first one is grants, which is the type of financial aid that everyone wants. It's the free money, you don't have to pay it back. That's once it's paid to the university, it's done. You don't have to worry about repayment of that money. And there are three basic sources of grants, and that comes either from the federal government in the form of Pell Grants or SEOG grants. State grants, so for the state of California, for example, we have the Cal Grant that's awarded by the California Student Aid Commission, and then university grants, which is free money that comes directly from the university. University grants is different from scholarships, even though both are free money. Scholarships are more based on merit, grants are based on need. The second type of aid are student loans, and there are two basic types of student loans. There's a subsidized student loan and the unsubsidized student loan. Subsidized student loans means that it's from the federal government. They're called direct loans, and the subsidized loans it means that the federal government is subsidizing the interest. So they are taking care of the interest while the student is in school. So basically, they take out the loan. Interest does not start accruing until the student graduates or is finished with school. So that's a great loan to have. You know that if you pay it back right when the student graduates, you're really just paying back the amount borrowed without any additional interest. Unsubsidized loans, the interest starts accruing right away as soon as the loan is taken out. However, for both types of loans, it's important to know that you don't actually have to start repayment until the student has graduated or has finished school. And I want to emphasize for this year especially, interest rates have gone down a lot. So it's definitely a good idea to seek out these loans, especially the students' loans, even if it's unsubsidized. For this current year, the direct loan is only a 2.75% interest rate. There's also a federal loan for parents called the PLUS loan. That's a 5.3% interest rate. So it's a relatively good option if you're seeking out some financing. And on the student side, it's a great way to start helping the student build credit for the future as well. So I think these loans are a great idea to take out if you're applying for financial aid. And then finally, there's work study. So work study is basically, it's an amount, typically maybe $3,000 for a year, that the student is awarded, but in order to get that money, they have to find a part-time job on campus. That's a work study job. Having work study makes a student a lot more hireable because that means the school doesn't have to pay the student as much of a salary because it is subsidized by work study funds through the federal government. So work study is definitely an excellent way of getting students, work experience and as well as some extra spending money. All right, so how do you apply for all of this financial aid that I just went over? So there are a few documents that you're going to need to fill out for financial aid. The first and foremost is the free application for federal student aid, also known as the FAFSA. Kelsey is going to pop the link into the FAFSA into the chat if you need it. The second one is known as College Board CSS Profile. So both links will be available in the chat. So the free application for federal student aid, FAFSA, is basically the application you're going to need to apply for any school that you want to apply for financial aid. It's the application for federal aid. You'll need to submit it for the state aid as well. It's a free application. Both the parent and students fill it out with general income asset information. It'll be available starting October 1st for the next school year for the 2021-22 school year. So starting October 1st, you can start filling that out. The College Board CSS profile, very similar to the FAFSA. Not every school requires it. Mostly private schools will require a CSS profile because it's used to calculate the institutional methodology. When schools want a little bit more information, the College Board CSS profile will provide that so that these schools can take those numbers into account when using the institutional methodology. And that will also be available starting October 1st through the CSS profile. And then for California residents, mostly the students' high school will take care of this, but what's also required is a California GPA verification form. If a student wants to apply or be eligible for the Cal Grant, this is going to be required, and typically the high schools will submit this information to the schools automatically. And then in addition to that, some schools will also ask for federal tax returns. So for the 21-22 school year, for example, you're going to need to submit your 2019 federal tax returns and W-2s just to so schools can verify the numbers that were submitted through the FAFSA and CSS profile. And then depending on your personal situation, if you have if your financial application isn't super straightforward and you have other sources of income or something going on with your family, there might be additional forms that the school is going to require. And they'll typically let you know right away as soon as you submit a FAFSA application or the CSS profile. They'll let you know what other forms they need, if any. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about professional judgment. So typically financial aid is calculated very by the numbers. There's very little gray area. It's based on your income, your assets, all the financial documents that you submitted. But there are certain times where professional judgment comes into play where the financial aid office of the school can take into account special circumstances that might be happening with the family. And this is going to be pretty common, especially for this year with COVID-19 and unemployment being higher. A lot of families are having decreased income. So that's going to be especially important coming up for applying for the next year. So there are typically two categories of professional judgment. One is a reduction in income and earnings. So if your family has experienced a loss of income for 2020 because of COVID-19 or any other reason, they're reduced hours, lost the job for whatever reason, you want to make sure that you let the financial aid office know about that. Because as I mentioned earlier, for 21-22 school year, you're going to be submitting 2019 tax returns. Those tax returns aren't going to reflect any loss of income that occurred in 2020. So you want to make sure that you let the financial aid office know about any change in your financial situation. Another category is extraordinary expenses. So that's typically because there is some unforeseen expense like medical expenses. If your family did suffer from COVID-19 and there's just extraordinary medical expenses that aren't captured within tax returns or documents, you want to make sure to let financial aid offices know about that as well. And the way to do that is really simple. It just needs to be a letter stating what the situation is, be as specific and clear as possible, and submit that letter or email to the financial aid office. They'll read that, and if they need further documentation like medical bills or a notice from your employer about your termination, things like that, they'll ask you for those documents. But really all it takes is to start it with an email or a letter explaining your situation, and that can start the professional judgment process. All right, so I wanted to present this chart to you because it gives a lot of information. One of the documents that you were sent earlier is the questions that we recommend that you ask to financial aid offices. So a lot of families don't know that you should ask financial aid offices what percentage need does the school meet as far as awarding financial aid. And this document right here gives you a variety of schools, and it kind of shows you how they compare and how they treat financial aid and how different universities are when it comes to awarding aid. So starting with Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, this is It's a California public school in the CSU system. Total cost of attendance is about $29,000. It's a big school with about 20,000 undergrads. They meet about 55% of financial need when calculating financial aid. About 21% of their students receive merit aid, and the average award for merit aid at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo is just under $2,000. So you notice that's for a state school. And then if you look at George Washington University, for example, which is a private university, it's about $74,000 for cost of attendance, so a lot more expensive than Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Smaller, about 11,000 undergrads. They try to meet about 84% of the financial need as calculated by the financial aid application, but they also offer about 52% of their students receive some kind of merit aid. And the merit aid is a pretty good number. About 21,000 is the average merit aid award that their students receive. And then compare that again with a school like Vanderbilt. The cost is pretty similar to George Washington. It's a smaller school, but they meet 100% of a student's financial need as calculated by their financial aid application. 20% of their students receive merit aid, and the merit aid ranges, but it's about 25,000 is the average merit aid award. So I wanted to highlight these because they're different institutions and they treat financial aid very differently. So the reason why you want to ask some of your schools if financial aid is going to be a factor, you want to see how much of what percent of their financial need is met through financial aid. That can give you a good idea of, you know, if this is going to be a viable option as a school for you. All right, so now we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit more about merit-based aid. There are two sources of merit-based aid, directly from the university and outside scholarships. And these outside scholarships can include, can be from anywhere, can be from large corporations, from student clubs. One of the other documents that was emailed to you earlier is a list of unusual scholarships. And basically scholarships come in, you know, from a variety of different sources and have a lot of different criteria. So there's basically a scholarship for any kind of special circumstance or talent or geographic area. So that's definitely something that that is worth looking into. So as I mentioned, the sources are from university scholarships, and some scholarships from the university, you don't have to do anything else other than submit the admissions application. So schools like USC, for example, University of Southern California, where I work, just by submitting the scholarship, the admissions application by a specific deadline of December 1st, you will automatically be applying for their awards, their scholarships. There's also alumni groups. Depending on what your student is majoring in, their major departments might offer scholarships. If your student is an athlete, a lot of schools will offer athletic scholarships. And then again, outside scholarships, high school student organizations and clubs like the Key Club or Amnesty International, some of these larger national organizations, if they have a chapter at your school and your student was part of it, they sometimes offer small scholarships as well. And then also private donors and corporations like Coca-Cola, Google, Microsoft, they'll often have scholarship contests that students can apply for. All right, so I wanted to give 3 examples of very different universities and the types of scholarships that they could offer to your students. So the first one is the University of Southern California. So you know this, it's a pretty famous school. It's where I work. It's a large private university. They have about over 20,000 undergraduate students. Just by submitting the admissions application by December 1st, again, you're applying for their main scholarships, like the trustee scholarship, which is their full tuition scholarship. Their presidential scholarship is which is a half tuition scholarship, and then a dean's scholarship, which is a quarter tuition. There are several other scholarships as well as part of the admissions process, also known as the leadership scholarship or the associate scholarship, and those awards will vary from like $5,000 a year to $10,000 a year, so those amounts vary. USC also has an organization called Town and Gown, which also has a scholarship component where it's a separate application, and this group, Town and Gown, awards scholarships based on that, so it's separate from the admissions process. And they also have a large alumni association with a lot of donors that award student scholarships too. And these can range anything from like $2,000, $3,000 to up to $10,000. So definitely a lot of different areas where you can find scholarships. USC major departments also offer a lot of scholarships. The Marshall School of Business, the Viterbi School of Engineering, they have a separate scholarship process as well. So if you don't get a scholarship through the admissions process or as a freshman, there are other scholarships you can apply to as continuing students. For example, I sat on the scholarship committee for the Marshall School of Business at USC this past year. Our scholarships ranged from $2,500 up to $10,000, and there's lots of different criteria and that students can qualify for. So you never know. Definitely a lot of scholarship money out there. And moving on to the University of California, the UC system. So this is a public school system, and they have what's called a middle class scholarship program. And this is also available at the Cal States. And basically, this is a kind of a combination of merit and need, where the goal of the scholarship is to help cover up to 40% of the UC system, the UC system's tuition and fees. So you have to apply for financial aid, so submitting the FAFSA application and all that, but there isn't any separate application required to apply for the middle class scholarship. And the threshold is essentially if your family's income and household assets are under $177,000 a year, you could qualify for the scholarship for up to 40,000 or 40% of the tuition and fees for the UC system. There's also campus-specific scholarships, like at Berkeley, they have a Regent Scholarship and a Chancellor Scholarship, and these have various components with them as well. There's a tuition scholarship, but there's also other benefits like first dibs on housing or research money, things like that. So different campuses within the UC system will have different scholarships as well. The third school I want to highlight is Ursinus, and this is very different. It's a smaller, very small liberal arts school in Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. It's about 1,500 undergraduate students. It's one of the 40 colleges that's profiled in the Colleges That Change Lives book. So I just wanted to present a different type of school as well. They offer a ton of scholarships. They have a Zacharias Honor Scholarship, which is their highest recognition for academic achievement and leadership, and it's $40,000 a year. They also have the Ursinus Gateway Scholarship, which is $35,000 a year, and basically any admissible applicant who has an unweighted GPA of 3.85 or higher automatically gets this scholarship. So that's definitely, if your student is thinking about a smaller liberal arts school, they are great options because they often have a ton of merit aid that they offer. There's also the Reverend Charles Rice Memorial Scholarship, which is based on students who have meaningfully impacted issues of diversity and inclusion. It's a $35,000 a year scholarship. And then they also have the Ursinus Scholarship, which is $21,000 to $30,000 a year. And then in addition to that, they have a legacy scholarship, which is similar to alumni scholarships, which are smaller amounts, $2,000 to $3,000, that can be added on to any of these other scholarships as well. So small liberal arts schools like Ursinus typically can be pretty generous with their merit aid. All right, so I want to also provide an example of a student that I worked with a couple of years ago. We'll call her Mary to protect her identity. This is a student who, she had a 3.89 unweighted GPA, ACT score of 31. She was very involved, so you'll see her involvement here. She was an intern with a program called Stand With Us. She was a teen fellow with the Dillard Teen Fellows program. She was in the youth orchestra as an academic mentor, a delegate in Model UN. She founded 2 clubs, the School Feminist Club and the Middle East Affairs Club, and also a counselor at the Tom Sawyer camp. So she was quite involved. So that's something to consider too. If you have students who are still early on in the high school process, definitely keep in mind involvement as a key way of helping earn scholarship money. So some of the schools that she was admitted to, she applied to a lot of schools first off. She applied, I think, like 20 schools, some with us and some on her own. And so these are just some of her results and her scholarship success. She was admitted regular decision in Brandeis and was named International Business Scholar. She got a $19,000 merit award from Lewis and Clark, admitted early action from Grinnell. Again, these are smaller liberal arts schools. So again, these are great colleges to apply to. $16,000 a year from Grinnell, $25,000 a year from Gettysburg, about $20,000 a year from Case Western, Denison, $26,000 a year, Mills, $24,000 a year, and then George Washington University, $20,000 a year. So she had a lot of choices that that she was choosing from when we worked with her, which is really great. All right, so some final thoughts and some key takeaways that I want to provide. Very important, when you're applying for financial aid, when you're looking at scholarships, don't assume that you're not eligible. And this goes for need-based and merit-based aid. At the very least, even if you feel like you're not going to be eligible for any need-based aid, just by submitting a FAFSA application, that makes you eligible for the federal student loans, the direct loan. Whether it's unsubsidized or subsidized, I think it's still a good idea to think about that, as the interest rates are pretty low. And again, as a good way of getting your students started with building credit. And with merit aid, it's you never know what the criteria is for merit aid. Again, for USC Marshall School of Business, we have one application for a ton of different donors with varying criteria. So just by submitting this application, a student can be applying for 100 different types of scholarships. Some are just, if you went to high school in Orange County, or if you were born of Finnish descent, for example, they'll have scholarship money for you. So definitely don't assume that you're not eligible, because you never know what the eligibility requirements are of some of these more general scholarships. Very important is to be aware of deadlines. A lot of schools, especially when it comes to need-based aid and merit-based aid, they are sticklers for the deadline. If you're even 1 day late with submitting some of these applications, you could lose eligibility for need-based aid. So just make sure that you are very cognizant of any deadlines for scholarships or need-based aid. I highly recommend that you and your students follow the schools on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, whatever it is, and not just the school in general, but their specific major department, their alumni associations, student clubs. I manage the social media Instagram account for the USC Marshall School of Business in our office, and I'm always posting reminders about scholarship deadlines or opportunities. And different alumni associations are also posting about their opportunities. So it's a great way to keep yourself informed about all these different opportunities. Don't rely on your students to be following these accounts. Students aren't necessarily the most reliable when it comes to relaying this information. So for parents, I definitely recommend that you follow these accounts as well. And then think about alternate sources of financial support. If it means talking to your student about getting a campus job, like being a resident assistant is a great way of being involved, developing leadership skills, and getting housing, room and board paid for as well. So that's definitely a great alternate source of financial support if you find that you're not eligible for scholarships or need-based financial aid. And then just a few resources to throw out there. If you're curious to see, how much a certain school is going to cost you based on your financial situation, most schools on their financial aid website will have a net price calculator where you can input your basic income, asset information, and it'll give you a ballpark figure of how much it should cost you for a year to attend that school. So look at the financial aid websites of the schools that you're thinking about. On Colledge's website, they also have an EFC calculator. So remember, EFC stands for expected family contribution. So if you want to get a rough idea of what your expected family contribution is, you can put in your information on the College Board EFC calculator. And then another resource is fastweb.com. And this is basically a search engine for scholarships. You fill out a profile, put in all the different criteria, and it'll match you with different scholarships that you might be eligible for and you can apply to. So definitely use that as a resource as well. There's a ton of different scholarships out there. So this is just one of the resources that you should look at. And also just make sure if you're looking for merit-based aid, talk to the financial aid office. They'll often know about the different organizations or major departments that offer merit-based aid for their students. So definitely a great resource as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. I learned so much every time I hear you talk about financial aid, and it couldn't be more appropriate, but we'll get a little bit more into that later. First of all, I want to let everybody here know about some upcoming events. The next one is a clients only event. It is on September 19th, this Saturday. It's an essay writing boot camp with James. If you are not our client and you are interested in signing up for a boot camp, please don't hesitate to reach out. I will put contact information into the chat box in just a few minutes. But we also have on Sunday, October 4th, our next essay webinar, How to Edit to Perfection. Sometimes once you finally get all the work done and you have all your good content out, it's hard to know how to polish your own work. So this webinar is aimed to help students with that. And then also for anybody who doesn't know, we have been hosting a series, Live with Colledge, that has been bringing in different admissions professionals for honest, transparent conversations on different topics. We're really excited to invite all of you to come on October 1st, which is at 6 p.m. These are just 30 minutes long. They're really easy. They're streamed live on Facebook and on YouTube. This particular one is with Peter Osgood, who is the Director of Admission at Harvey Mudd College. And it is geared towards thinking into how STEM admissions work and what that means for a student, whether they be a current senior or whether they're maybe a little younger and they're trying to think how to prepare and make themselves a really appealing applicant a little bit down the line. These events come up every few weeks, so make sure you follow us on social media. And I will also be popping in the link to sign up for this right now. Oops. So this link, thecolledge.org/the-college-talks, is where you're going to find all of the upcoming events. You're also going to find an archive of all of our past events. Just a few weeks ago, we interviewed Gary Clark, who is the Director of Undergraduate Admissions at UCLA. We interviewed Pomona College. We interviewed Claremont McKenna, CU Boulder, a whole bunch of schools. So I'd highly recommend you check out this link and go watch our archives and also see what's coming up next. These events, as I said, are free and completely open to the community. So if you know anybody who's stressed out and isn't here tonight, please feel free to invite them. Okay, so Jeff, I was thinking about this and I think this was just so helpful because look, every single year, cost of college is a major factor, right? It's a major stressor. And I think this year more than any other, people are worried, they're scared. And, you know, people have had maybe a change in income and things like that. So I want to open it up to some questions. I'm sure you guys are all brimming with questions. Feel free to roll your mouse over the bottom of the screen. You'll see a little Q&A box. And you can pop in questions there. While you get that going, I'm gonna ask Jeff some questions we've been getting a lot. And I want to encourage all of you to stay on through questions, partly because questions are hugely valuable. You never know when somebody else is gonna give voice to your question. And also, we would really love to get your feedback on whether this webinar has been useful for you, whether it's given you the information that you needed at the end. So I want to encourage all of you to stay in through questions and give us your feedback in that ending poll. So one of the things I was kind of surprised at, or I think a lot of people will be surprised at, is that you don't really, it sounds like you don't have to be a 4.0 1600 student, 1600 SAT student to qualify for scholarships for merit-based aid. It was really interesting to hear about all of these quirky little scholarships. So it sounds like you should never assume that you wouldn't qualify even for merit-based aid.
Correct, yeah. Especially, I would say especially merit-based aid, because it's not as straightforward when it comes to merit-based aid. The awarding of that money can be a little bit more subjective. And if you're the only student of a certain nationality or from a certain high school, you never know. Just my experience again with the scholarship committee at USC Marshall, we were awarded a ton of scholarships, and it really came down to awarding students who weren't necessarily 4.0, 3.9 students. There were oftentimes we were awarding students with a little bit lower, like a 3.1, 3.2, especially if a scholarship requires you to be very involved and demonstrate a lot of leadership. And if you put in time into that activity, but maybe your GPA is not a 4.0, there are definitely scholarships out there that you're going to be eligible for. So definitely do not assume that you're not eligible. It just takes a little bit of time to apply for scholarship. It doesn't cost you anything. So really there's no reason not to apply.
Wonderful. So you mentioned deadlines a bunch of times, and I'm wondering, how can I be sure that I'm submitting, my financial information and also my application by a certain date? Where would I find those deadlines, and how can I be sure that it's not like, do I need to apply early action, or how do I know when to apply?
Yeah, so different schools will have different deadlines. So it's always best to go straight to the source. Go to the financial aid websites of the schools that you're applying to and look at those deadlines, because there will be a general deadline on the FAFSA application on their website or on College Board, but that doesn't mean that your school doesn't require you to turn in things earlier. So definitely make sure to check all the schools that you're applying for, look at their websites. So again, sign up for their mailing list, follow them on social media, because if you need reminders, that's the best way of doing it. And same thing for scholarships, just straight to the source. That's going to be your best resource for keeping track of all these deadlines, because it's not just going to be one deadline across the board for a lot of these scholarships. It'll be varied throughout the academic year.
Thank you. So in this new test optional world, how do test scores now play into merit-based aid? Are they not going to be considered? Do you have any insights into that, or expectations as to what will happen with that?
Yeah, so this is very unexplored territory. So right now, a lot of admissions, just scholarships and financial aid aside, even just through the admissions process, schools might say that they're test optional, but we don't know if they're actually going to be truly test optional, where they won't ding you for not taking SATs or ACTs. And there's no guidance for that right now for the admissions world. And similarly, there's not really any precedent for that in scholarships or financial aid either. One of the main criteria for a lot of scholarships is going to be test scores. So now that a lot of universities might not be requiring those, they might not be on file, they might have to also look at other ways to determine eligibility. They might put more emphasis on GPA or community involvement, leadership development. So it's just going to be dependent on a lot of different factors at this point. So it's hard to say how every university is going to handle it. It's definitely going to be different school to school.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And speaking of, unprecedented years, you mentioned professional judgment, and I'm wondering if you have any, extra information about how do financial aid officers decide when to use their professional judgment and when not to?
So for need-based aid, it's definitely pretty cut and dry. If the numbers support it, if you're able to provide the documents to support, either a loss of income, or you're able to provide medical statements showing that you've incurred a lot of costs with medical expenses this year, they'll take that into account, and they'll be able to kind of adjust numbers in certain ways. So for example, instead of looking at your 2019 income, if you had a loss of income for 2020, they can substitute that in if you let them know that you had a drastic decrease in income for the year. But it's all based on numbers. It's not going to be, they feel like you need some more help, so they're going to give you more money. It's really, if you have the documentation to back up your appeal, your professional judgment request, they'll do what they can to support that. But also make sure that if you submit it early on, the earlier that you can submit any kind of financial aid appeal or professional judgment request, the better, because schools don't operate on a unlimited supply of money. So they'll take these appeals and requests as much as they can, but at a certain point during the school year, their funds are going to start being very limited, and they might not be able to accommodate appeals down the road. So just keep that in mind and submit information as early as you can.
That's really useful to know. So how do I, if I'm a parent and I have suffered a loss of income, how do I go about requesting an appeal or requesting that somebody use their their professional judgment?
Just start it off with a letter. It can be an email. Doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be your life story or anything, as long as you at least started out saying, this in 2020, I lost my job. This is, I have a zero income now, or I've lost hours. You can state what your current income is, and submit that to the financial aid office. They'll look at that, and they'll likely request more documentation. So if it is because of a loss of a job, then they're likely going to ask you for a letter from your former employer stating when you were let go. They might ask for your last pay stub to find out how much money you got on your last pay stub once you cashed out all your vacation days, things like that. So just be prepared to provide the supporting documentation like pay stubs. They might have extra forms for you to fill out to get a better understanding of what your financial situation is like. But really be as specific and clear in the initial letter that you give to the financial aid office, and then they'll let you know what other documents they're going to need.
Great. So let's say in the hypothetical, situation that, God forbid, that although I know that this applies to many families, I've suffered a really major loss, something really terrible due to COVID-19. What would be appropriate to include in that letter, and what would be inappropriate to include in that letter?
What's appropriate to include is anything that is financial related, so numbers based. So whatever situation happened that affected the loss of income, that's what you want to include. You don't need to include any private details of how long you were in the hospital, how bad the illness was. Really, anything that supports the numbers is what you want to include. And if the financial aid office needs more information, they'll ask for it.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. You are truly a font of information and knowledge. I want to encourage still anybody who still has questions to throw them in the Q&A box. I also want to encourage anybody who still has questions and feels like maybe they need more of a conversation to reach out. The first step with us is always a free phone call, and often just getting information, just talking to somebody and finding out what you don't know. You can't know what you don't know. And even just what to think about, what to look for on a website can be hugely, hugely helpful. So I want to encourage any of you, or if you have friends who are really stressed out, to go ahead and reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to just jump on the phone and discuss your specific situation. If you feel after that you want to work with us, great. If not, great. And I want to encourage you to visit all of the links that I've posted into the chat, the Zoom webinar chat. You'll see the contact information to sign up for that free phone call. Also the colledge.org/the Colledge Talks. That is going to be where you find more free resources and everything that we have to offer, as well as the FAFSA and CSS profile links to help you get on your way to those financial aid applications. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the second poll. We would really love to hear your feedback. As I mentioned, this whole series, the reason this workshop is so specialized, so full of information, it's normally only offered to our clients, if I'm being honest. But this year, we want to try to reach as many people as we can with just better information, because it's a really hard year. So if you could please participate in our poll, let us know how we did. We would deeply appreciate it. Thank you.